From Sajid Javid to Zara Sultana, politicians from the right and left have attacked Jimmy Carr for a joke he made about the Holocaust in his latest comedy show. For context, here's what he said.
When people talk about the Holocaust, they talk about the tragedy and horror of 6 million Jewish lives being lost to the Nazi war machine. But they never mention the thousands of gypsies that were killed by the Nazis. No one ever wants to talk about that because no one ever wants to talk about the positives.
In his column for the magazine this week, Douglas Murray says that while Carr is, quote, one of the comedians I dislike the most, and despite the joke being, quote, cruel and unwitty, government regulation will set a dangerous precedent. To explain, Douglas joins me now. Douglas, in this week's magazine, you write about Jimmy Carr. What do you make from the fallout from his Netflix special?
Well, there's several very interesting things about it. One of them is that Jimmy Carr, I'm not a fan of his. I'm sort of standing up for his right to make jokes, including unpleasant jokes. But what I think is happening here is, first of all, is what is known as context collapse, where an in-group's conversation is discovered by an out-group. Jimmy Carr's audience know exactly what they're getting when they go to his shows. It's one reason I don't go to his shows. I don't particularly like what he offers. But his audience, his fans, know what they're getting when they go to his shows or when they click on his Netflix specials. What's happened this past week has been that an out-group has discovered a part of this material. One joke from his show, His Dark Material, was excerpted, sent around on Twitter, and he was then subjected to the inevitable 5 minutes of hate, which follows. It's a very typical story. And I think that the most worrying bit of it is actually not the public or Twitter sphere reaction, which is as deranging and deranged as it always is. The most disturbing thing is that government ministers once again have felt that they need to intervene and say what they think should be joked about and what should not.
Yeah, so the Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, has said that the joke was shocking and has suggested that the government would be looking at ways to sanction outlets like Netflix if they were to publish this sort of thing. I can't help but feel this is going to go badly, badly wrong.
Yeah, as ever with politicians, you get this horrible feeling like we've not discussed free speech before, whereas in Britain we've discussed it for centuries. And we know the parameters, and we know the problems, and we know the risks, and we know the rewards. But yes, the idea that Nadine Dorries feels compelled to speak about this, and of course she's as culture secretary, she's actually potentially got some sway on it. Sajid Javid, once again, strangely, it's another intervention from him in the free speech issue, has also condemned this. Well, what does the health secretary have to do with deciding what content Netflix should or shouldn't put out? What jokes people should or shouldn't say? And then you've got the worst person of all, is totally unheard of previously, SNP councillor. Of course, it's someone from the SNP who have less understanding of freedom than perhaps anybody else in the country. But it's an SNP councillor who has called not just for the prosecution of Jimmy Carr for hate speech, but the prosecution of his audience for laughing. I mean, this is just, as I say, maybe we can just ignore it because it's an SNP councillor. But it's very worrying that anyone in any position of power at all in this country has such a lack of understanding of basic freedoms that they think you should be able to prosecute people for being caught laughing at the wrong material. It's pathetic.
Well, Douglas, to go back to Jimmy Carr, you write in your column that if you find a joke distasteful, if you find a comedian distasteful, there's a really easy way of handling this, and that's just don't tune in, don't watch them. Do you think there's ever a time where a joke can go too far in which just saying, I'm tuning out, I'm not paying attention, isn't quite good enough?
Oh, I think jokes go too far all the time. One of the points of comedy in a society is to try to work out where those points are. Another point, by the way, of comedy is to help us deal with very unpleasant and ugly things about life. You know, the old saying, if you didn't laugh, you'd cry, comes from a very basic recognition about comedy, which is that it helps us through horrible, ugly, dark things. Now, I think some comedians are very, very adept at finding their way through that. Jimmy Carr, to give him credit, I say I'm not an admirer of his particularly, to give him credit, isn't bad at navigating some of that. There are much better people, Ricky Gervais, for instance. But I mean, the history of comedy is of people trying to find their way through the maze of current taboos and much more. And so, of course, people can go too far. But the other point about that is they can go too far for certain audiences. As I say, again, it's about this in-group, out-group thing. A particular audience knows what they're going to get. And an outside audience may not be aware of that at all. And this is happening not just with comedy, it's happening with literature and much more. But I think that it's strange that in our era, comedians keep on becoming the sort of brunt of these strange stampedes that happened recently with a far more talented comedian than Jimmy Carr, which is Dave Chappelle in the States. And the reason why it's happening, as I say, is because comedians are meant to explore difficult material.
Douglas, one really interesting part of your column was where you talk about Ricky Gervais and a joke that he has made about Anne Frank. And you say in the column that you think he was just on the right side of the line. You think he just got away with it. But you also say that you probably have to be Jewish or making a deeper point in order to make a joke like that. And I'm curious, do you think that that is the case when it comes to humor for all forms of identity?
Yes, I think so. I think that it's a comedian has to earn the trust of his audience for them to allow him or her to go to transgressive places. Now, the obvious thing is that an audience is more likely to trust the particular comedian, that they're going to go to those places and be trustworthy, as it were, if that person already is clearly not, for instance, beating up on a particular minority for the sake of them being a minority. The most obvious example is there are things that black comedians are able to say which white comedians are not. There are things that Jewish comedians are able to say that non-Jewish comedians are not. And I give this example in the piece about, as it were, jokes about the Holocaust, because there are some Jewish jokes about the Holocaust. And it's a sort of subgenre, and it's a very, very complex terrain. But one of the things that has existed in what jokes there are about the Holocaust is an attempt not just to deal with the horror, but to say something about it. I give an example in the piece of a joke of two men killed in the Holocaust. They're in heaven. They're talking. And they're laughing about something that happened in the camps. And they're laughing so much they attract the attention of God, who's passing by. And God stops and he says, my children, how can you laugh at such things? And one of them says to God, I guess you had to be there. Now, I mean, that's a joke with a heck of a punch. And it has a real point to it. Now, I think, again, if audiences have to feel a confidence that the comedian is doing something that and has their trust. The example I give of the Ricky Gervais joke about Anne Frank, which I thought, as I say in the piece that you just quoted, was just about on the borderline, was I said, I'm not quite sure you've earned the right to do that. In other words, I sort of think a long and, a very elderly comedian, preferably Jewish, could potentially get away with that joke. But you have to sort of trust, them now. I trust Ricky Gervais on that. But that trust element with the audience is incredibly important. But this is about the sort of finery of comedy and comedy techniques. And what I worry about is a much broader thing, which is comedians keep on getting it at the moment because they're at the forefront of some of the free speech issues of our time. And the absolutely central issue of our time on this is a deep misunderstanding, or at least uncertainty in our societies, about what is speech and what is action. And this sort of condemnation of Jimmy Carr for this, I think, very tasteless and unfunny joke seems to me to be constantly, not just by the idiot SNP councillor, but by others as well, confused with action. These are words. It is a joke, and you either laugh or you don't. It's not the same as action. And we've sort of told ourselves in our age that speech and action are so close to each other that you have to always stamp down on the speech, otherwise action will inevitably follow. And I don't think that is the case. I think it's very lazy. And as I say toward the end of the piece, I think one of the reasons why these sort of stamping on the comedians is happening is because it is quite easy in the court to hang the jester. It's much easier than ruling the land justly or wisely. And I think that our ministers and even our councillors should reflect on that.
And Douglas, Netflix so far have not taken down the Jimmy Carr special. In the age of cancel culture, it feels like not taking something down feels like a bit of a win for free speech. But I'm curious as to how this compares to Spotify and Joe Rogan. While I have you here, I'd love to know what you think of what's been happening to him. And I know that you've been on his show a few times.
Yeah, I admire Joe enormously. He's a seriously talented comedian and an unbelievably talented podcaster. I don't think people realise, unless they've seen it done badly, as it were, what it involves to be as good at what he does as Joe is. It's quite amazing to have sort of multi-hour conversations. It's completely gripping. He has trust of his audience, and again, it comes back to the same thing. It's an in-group, out-group thing. Joe Rogan has a larger following than any commercial television channel. And a lot of the old media have been gunning for Joe, and they've been doing it through very typical means. Again, selecting certain things that they believe are being said, that the people in the conversation know are not being said. So the BBC and others this week just ran a story claiming that Joe Rogan has had to apologise for racist language in the past. They imply that Joe Rogan has been a racist in the past and has been caught using racist language. And this isn't the case at all. And all of Joe Rogan's followers know that he's the furthest person from being a racist you could possibly be. It's an absurd and obscene accusation. But the allegation is made because on occasions in the past they've found times when he has used the N-word in the context of quoting somebody using the N-word. And now there is a total prohibition on even quoting people saying that. And that is quite different from somebody throwing around racist language and calling people, vile racist terms. So the old media has tried to destroy this absolute top figure in the new media. I think it won't work. I think Spotify are absolutely right to stand beside him, should stand beside him, and not just for commercial reasons, but for very obvious strategic and moral ones. Because if you allow the mob to take out somebody as important, as impressive as Joe Rogan, it'll take out absolutely everybody next. So Spotify should absolutely stand behind him. I'm glad they have so far. I hope that Netflix stand up for Jimmy Carr. I hope that everybody stands up for their mates. I hope that everyone stands up for the right of people to make jokes and to explore difficult things. And obviously this is partly, as you know, Kate, an issue of self-interest as well, because after they've got rid of all of the comedians, they'll be coming for the writers and journalists, and you and I better watch our backs.
Well, Douglas, I very much hope that everybody reads your column this week in the Spectator magazine. Thanks for joining me.